Desigal Magazine, and today we are going to talk with Dr. Priya. She will help us to understand how we can improve our habits, and also, especially due to the pandemic, we have issue with our health, with overeating, with diabetes, etc. So, Dr. Priya is going to talk about all those general problems which we have in daily life and how we can improve that. So let me go ahead and add Dr. Priya. Hey, hi.
Hi, Urvi. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great.
How was your day?
Day is going well. How's your day going?
Day is good. Like finally, as we were going to talk about healthy habits, so I just finished my morning walk.
Wow, that's great. Perfect. And very apt for our topic. And I'm so excited to tell everyone about some healthy habits today.
Thank you so much for taking out the time. And because like some many times we think we know everything, but sometimes we miss the basic information,
Mhm.
and that can really help everyone.
No, for sure. And I'm very excited to share with you little tidbits and tricks about healthy habits and some very important information too.
Yeah, thank you so much. So let's start with the basic question. What are healthy habits?
So, with healthy habits, we can talk about a lot of things, whether that comes to stress management, sleeping, hydration. But I think there's five key things, I want to focus on this time, which, really center around eating a healthy, balanced diet. Then, of course, exercising regularly. And I'll just throw in some small definitions as we're going through them. So that means about, greater than 30 minutes for most days of the week, right? So they recommend about either 150 minutes of moderate intensity or 75 minutes of some rigorous activity. Then I would say, the other important thing is keeping a healthy body weight. Ahead of that, I would say not drinking too much alcohol. So moderate alcohol intake. And for females, that's usually less than one drink per day or less than seven throughout the week. And for
Okay.
males, it's less than two per day and less than 14 per the week. And that will change. The standard of what one drink is changes internationally, but for us in the United States, it's usually 14 to 15 grams of ethanol, either 12 ounces of beer, 5 ounces of wine, or about 1.5 ounces of 80 proof spirits. So that's the definition. And the other thing is to avoid smoking. So I chose these five because they're all modifiable lifestyle factors. And the reason they're important is because having a good balanced diet, having high diet quality, avoiding smoking, having good physical activity, having moderate alcohol intake, all of these things, they tend to affect your total life expectancy. And they also affect, your incidence of chronic diseases. And what do I mean by chronic diseases? I mean, your diabetes, your heart disease, cancer, things like that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So, how important is food habits when it comes to a healthy lifestyle?
Very important is the short answer, but I'll give you a little bit of background about why it's so important. So, studies have shown that, with smoking, physical inactivity, high alcohol intake, poor diet quality, all of these factors, which I told you about, can contribute to about 60% of premature death. 60%. And it can also lower your life expectancy by about 7 to 18 years per the studies. And back in 2016, the World Health Organization had estimated that about 2 billion people worldwide were either overweight or living with obesity. And now that's increased to about 3 billion people who are either overweight or living with obesity. And the reason I'm bringing up, living with obesity, because it's associated with many high, risks for diseases. For example, heart disease, right? And even death from heart disease is higher when you are living with obesity. And then it also contributes to many things like high cholesterol, right? High blood pressure, diabetes, sleeping disorders. So, all of these things, are related to living with obesity or being overweight. And generally, when we're managing our weight to have an ideal or healthy body weight, usually we ask for a clinically relevant reduction in weight, which can be anywhere from 10 to 15%. And that usually helps with a lot of the conditions that I mentioned. And how do we do that? We usually do that through an individualized approach with diet and exercise. So that's why, food, nutrition becomes a key cornerstone foundation for that.
Yeah, of course. So, like as you said, right, lot of like alcohol and everything we should avoid as much as we can, and we should have a healthy food. But like, what does a healthy diet should look like?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Urvi. And I think we could do a whole session just on that. And even, I think the more important thing is that it's such a personalized thing. So I guess one thing that would be basic and appropriate for everyone is the reason it's personalized is because it depends on your goals, right? Is your goal to maintain your weight? Is your goal to lose weight? And some people are actually trying to bulk up their weight, right? So it really depends on that. Now, when it comes to other factors, your age, your height, your weight, your sex, your physical activity, your medical conditions, all of those things matter, right? And as far as, what are the basic tenets of a healthy, balanced diet? Well, American Heart Association lists a couple of, key factors between having a healthy and balanced diet. And that's mostly including all of the food groups, right? So for example, like for vegetables, they usually recommend 5 servings a day. For fruits, they recommend 4 servings a day. For whole grains, they want you to have whole grains with lots of fiber. That's usually about, 3 to 6 servings. Then they want proteins, usually skinless poultry, lean meat, so that's, again, about 2 servings a day. And then, you can't forget about limiting, salt, sweet, processed sugars. Um, you want to avoid, saturated and trans fats. You want to go for the unsaturated fats, right? You hear a lot about, using extra virgin olive oil when you're cooking or using avocado oil, things like that. And all of these things, those are some of the basic tenets, but all of this can also be changed according to the medical conditions which you have. So you'll hear about, certain diets like the Mediterranean diet or the DASH diet, which is, for people who may have high blood pressure, or a low carb diet for people who may have diabetes. So all of this is dependent on, very individualized goals and also your medical conditions and kind of your makeup, right? So that's why it's so hard to give very individualized recommendations in a session like this, but those are some of the basic tenets of having a good diet.
So, like, do you think because people don't have a balanced diet, that is the main problem they are having issues with their health?
Yeah, so there are a couple of actually useful resources that you can use. So if you go on American Heart Association's website, it'll list out how many servings you should be having of these food groups to keep a good balance. Another good tool is, the USDA, the US Department of Agriculture, they have something called a My Plate Plan, which shows you the proportion you should be having of every food group, depending on like breakfast, lunch, dinner, and even, New York as a state has their own My Plate Planner as an app. So if you go online and you look at these things, it gives you a very good outline of what your plate should look like.
Oh, that's great. Like, we will definitely share the website link so
Sure.
like people can see. Yeah, of course. So I would say like, this is about the food, right? But also
Yes.
exercise is also important, right? So what do you think? Like, how frequently we should exercise, and especially the people who have maybe knee problem, or maybe they cannot do more workouts. So what kind of suggestion you have for them?
Yeah. So, generally for the average person, they recommend about 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity exercise. And, that can be a range of different things. So usually, people just think of brisk walking, but that can even be, for example, water aerobics for someone who may have knee problems, or may have, very bad arthritis or joint problems. We often recommend, water aerobics, physical therapy, light exercise like that. So I think it's up to your tolerance, but there's different forms of exercise, right? Even for, for moderate intensity, some people might like to bike. and that could be on a flat terrain, right? Or maybe they like to play tennis. And so doubles tennis, that qualifies as well. Or if they like to do some forms of yoga, right? So power yoga can even count. So, those are some easy ways to kind of, you can find your niche as according to your physical, abilities and
Mm-hmm.
kind of go from there. The other recommendation is to, if it's not, 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise, you can do 75 minutes of intense, vigorous exercise. So that'll be, for example, you're running, jogging, hiking up an incline, or biking maybe more than 10 miles per hour with weights, rigorous forms of dancing, playing sports like basketball, singles tennis, so things like that. So there are many different things, even swimming, right? If you're swimming laps, that
Mm-hmm.
would also count. But generally between the 150 minutes of moderate and the 75 of intense, you can even do a combination. So it doesn't have to be either or, you can mix and match. The
Okay.
other thing is, they usually recommend out of the week, 2 days, you should have some sort of resistance or weight training.
Okay.
So that's another thing. And of course, the basic tenet, which now I think has become a little bit easier with technology, people tend to wear their smart watches, their Apple watches, and that is to make sure that you're not sitting for too long, that you're
Mm-hmm.
not sedentary, that you get up, you walk around, things like that. So those general things always come into play along with these very, guideline oriented numbers, that I'm talking about with 150 minutes. But I think there are so many benefits from just pushing the limits of just getting up and, walking around a little bit more. So those are some things. And obviously, you can increase the intensity slowly over time, or the amount of time that you're exercising.
Okay. So, like, as you mentioned, right? For an example, I'm a very beginner and I start with the walking. So, like, can you mention in the steps, like, because I'm a slow walker, I don't know what is the intensity of my walk. So, can I measure in number of steps? Like, I can have a goal, maybe 5,000 steps a day or something like that.
Yeah, so I would say, anywhere you start from, everyone's baseline will be different, right? So
Yeah.
some people maybe walk only 2,000. Then I would say you should increase slowly over time. Generally, the goal is at least 10,000
Mhm.
steps. But, I think some improvement is better than no improvement, right? And everyone's graph is different. So
Yeah.
if walking is easy for you, then you can always start with, walking from maybe 2,000 steps going up to 5,000 and maybe just increasing the pace a little bit. So maybe from a relaxed walk, going to more of a brisk walk. So walking a little bit faster. Or,
Okay.
walking with maybe a weight in your hand. Or if you don't have a weight and you're at home, you can pick up anything, right? It could be a gallon of milk. That could be your weight. So you can do very simple things like that. But the increment of improvement is also what's important.
Okay. And also, like, maybe staying consistent is also important, right?
Yes. So that applies to both things, right? Exercise and diet. And I think that's one thing that people fall into the misconception of. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? You want your health changes, your lifestyle changes to be consistent throughout, and that's something I find very often. People will come in with crash and fad diets and they lose all of this weight. And then before you know it, they're gaining it back. So
Yeah.
that's the problem. You want to have diet and exercise routines that you can actually maintain because that's the goal, right? You want to maintain your strength and nutrition.
Yeah. That was actually my next question because, like, people don't have problem with changing lifestyle, but staying consistent and how to manage that healthy lifestyle, that is really a struggle for, like, I would say 50% of the people at least.
Yes, and that's why I think even for, things like diet, it's very important that you get a very personalized plan. Because let's say, they tell you eat a certain vegetable and you don't even have that in your house, nor do you like it. Will you follow it? No, right? So it's very important to make everything very individualized and personalized. And I think the same goes with exercise. Like I said, some people will tell you, okay, I need you to, have a 5 pound weight with you when you're going walking, but maybe you don't have it at home. So what can you do to substitute that, right? According to your surroundings. So I
Yeah.
think those are things that are very important. And I think the other thing, you know, people have to be careful of, especially with diet, is a lot of these crash diets that come along, or some diets, you know, that aren't even really scientifically proven. You know, you'll hear about things like blood type diet and all of this. And it's very important to be careful, you know, and really speak to your doctor about different diets that you're going on, even like keto and everything. You should definitely let, you know, your healthcare provider know what diet you're on.
Yeah, so like, would you recommend when someone hire a nutrition and whatever diet they provide, once you get the diet plan, you should consult with your primary doctor and see if that works with your health. Would you recommend that first?
Yes, definitely. Because, like I said, a lot of your medical conditions will also play into that, right?
Yeah.
And like I said, your goals, I think your nutrition, dietitian, they can help you with. And I think also letting them know about your medical conditions, you know, then they can keep that in mind when they formulate a plan with you. But I think it's always a good idea to let your doctor know about changes that you're making in your lifestyle. Even if it's good things, right? Like changing your diet, they should know. Even, you know, improving your exercise habits, they should definitely know about that. We're always happy to hear that.
Thank you, thank you. That's really great. And because, as a person, we might don't know about the side effect and the medical effects which we get with sudden diet changes, but definitely you as a doctor can help us to understand like what sudden changes can affect on our health. So yeah.
Of course. I mean, in fact, I just remembered a story someone, you know, a colleague of mine was sharing with me. They saw someone recently and they said, you know, this person who I was taking care of as their physician didn't tell me that someone had mentioned to them to do fruit therapy, meaning increasing their fruit intake by, you know, a lot. And this person actually had diabetes. Now, I'm not saying people with diabetes cannot have fruits, but what I'm saying is, you know, it needs to be in moderation and a balance with checking certain things like, you know, how many grams of carbs there are, how does it make your sugar spike, you know, what medications you're on. All of these things play in together, and they didn't let their doctor know. So the next time they came in and they had their diabetes test done, they were much worse. So the doctor was asking them, what changes have you made? And they were like, oh, nothing. You know, I actually did something very good. I increased my fruit intake, you know, and I started eating this type of fruit and that type of fruit. And the doctor said, oh, you should have told me, you know, I would have helped you pick the appropriate choices. So sometimes, you know, we think we're doing something good. And like I said, fruits are not necessarily a bad thing when it comes to diabetes or, you know, for anybody. But to know, you know, the limitation, the balance, the moderation is very important. So I think it's really, really important to talk to your doctor about all of those changes.
Yeah. So because you mentioned about the fruits, I just have like question. I read in some article, grapefruit is really helpful in diabetes. Is it true? Like I just read. I don't have any facts or anything.
So it depends what they're talking about, right? Like some fruits are recommended based on them being low carb, right? So for example, like watermelon, berries, cantaloupe, honeydew, these things are low in carb, which can be helpful for someone who may be living with diabetes and is trying to choose an appropriate fruit to have, you know? But at the same token, you also have to watch different fruits cause your sugar to rise at a different rate. So that's why I'm saying it's very important to talk to your nutritionist or your doctor or your dietitian about what your selection is and how that's going to affect your sugars if you're a diabetic. Um, yeah, and also other medical conditions and medications. So people don't know, for example, like grapefruit can actually interact with some blood thinners. So you have to be very mindful of these things. Sometimes we think, oh, no problem, I'm having a glass of grapefruit juice, but it might actually be having an interaction with some of your medications.
Okay.
So you have to be very mindful. And that's why I'm saying all of these changes that we may not think matter, they do matter. So we must inform our doctors about these changes.
Yeah, of course. So, as we were talking about general, but as you said in the earlier interview, right? You have a lot of South Asian patients too, and definitely, I would say diabetes is very common in South Asians because our diets are different, right? Most of our food carry carbs.
Yes.
Uh, Yeah, so what you have seen in your practice with South Asians and the diabetes?
Yeah, so like I said, it's very important that your doctor personalizes things to you. So, if I tell someone just eat less carbs and they're of South Asian descent, I know they're gonna go home and have that roti, have that paratha, have, whatever they're having at home. And, it's very important. You can find very healthy substitutes for a lot of those foods. And
Mhm.
that we can do again a whole nother session on how to substitute things in a very healthy manner to, accommodate a South Asian diet. But as a basic rule, sometimes even just decreasing your portion size can help. Maintaining the balance that you have on your plate can also help. Like you said, we're very carb heavy. So maybe increasing, the vegetables and the fruits and decreasing, the carb, increasing the protein and then decreasing the carb. So that, balance of what your plate looks like is also very important. Your portion size is important. Then, you can make healthy substitutions also according to how much your carb intake is. Sometimes what's also helpful is being able to count the carbs that you're
Yeah.
eating, especially if you're someone who has diabetes and we recommend anywhere from, 45 to 60 grams of carbs per meal. Then you need to, equip yourself with those tools to know, okay, I'm eating this thing today and it has this many carbs. So I have to be mindful now. I have to watch, if I'm a little over, then maybe I'll compensate in a different meal. So
Okay.
these are where things come, into play. So I would say the balance of what you have is important on the plate. The portion size is important. Portion size is different than serving size. And then again, substitution of certain foods with other foods,
Yeah.
maybe more unprocessed foods, maybe foods with more fiber, more whole grains, things like that.
Okay. So, as we know, right, since last year, everything has changed due to pandemic, and we have seen a lot of stress and depression and all in people, and that can cause like food disorder, right? So, how what kind of suggestion you will give to manage the stress?
Yeah, so stress can affect every single system in your body, right? So think about when you get stressed, there's a stress hormone that releases in your body, and all of a sudden your heart is beating so fast and it's pounding, and your blood pressure is going up, and people often feel like, their muscles are getting tight, especially around their neck, their shoulders, their back, their belly can get upset, um, their breathing can get fast. Even studies have been done showing that stress even affects your reproductive organs in females and males. So you'll see oftentimes when people are going through fertility issues, they say to decrease the amount of stress you have. So it affects almost every single system in your body. So it's a very important thing that you um, manage that stress level. So one is obviously acknowledging it. Two is after that is, getting a good amount of sleep. So most adults need about 7 hours of sleep. I think people nowadays think sleep is a luxury, but it's actually critical, right? It's a
Yeah.
critical part of your life. So, it really needs to be taken into account that way. And we can talk a little bit about sleep hygiene, but the other thing is, getting a good amount of physical activity and exercise. I think that's something, for some people, it's that has increased throughout the pandemic. They've, become a little bit more in tune with nature, doing activities alone. But for some other people, they've gained the pandemic pounds, right? So we've also seen that. We've seen both sides. And then I think, along with exercise, sleeping well, I think the other thing is to maintain, a social network. So whether that's, if you're distancing, then virtually or over the phone. And then the other thing is also, if you do need help, then you have to reach out for help, right? You have to make sure that either you tell somebody you need help or reach out to a mental health provider. Even if that's just for stress management, there's nothing wrong with that, seeing a therapist or a psychiatrist for that.
Yeah, of course, because like I have seen a lot of people become chef during pandemic, and
Mhm.
a lot of people started cooking by themselves,
Yeah.
and it makes more like your eating disorder. You don't have a proper schedule of what you are eating at what time you are eating, and that cause a lot of medical issues as well, especially when you already have a pre-existing condition, right?
Yes. And then on the other hand, I've also seen very good things come out of the pandemic where people have started gardening in their backyards, and then using a lot of, organic food that way and cooking with that. So they've kind of strayed away from more of the refined, processed foods and gone towards more of whole and, unprocessed and organic foods. So it can be both ways. It's
Yeah.
just, the amount of effort, time that it takes, and I think sometimes it's important to look for that silver lining even in the dark days, right? So if you are stuck at home, then maybe engaging in some of those new habits, like going into the kitchen, picking up some cooking skills, gardening, growing your own, produce that you might use in cooking. I think those are all great things.
Yeah, like I would definitely say pandemic has changed our view. Like the earlier we were thinking like we need time to learn many things, but pandemic has changed whole life, I would say.
Yeah, no, for sure. I see here in the comments someone's writing about how they have trouble sleeping. So
Yeah.
I know you mentioned, uh, just we were talking about the importance of sleep. So
Yeah.
maintaining sleep hygiene is also very important. So I can go into a couple of tidbits just to help this person out with some basics.
Yeah.
So maintaining regular hours of sleeping are very important. So what time you go to sleep and what time you wake up, if you can make that regular, that really helps. The other thing people don't realize actually is that getting a good amount of sunlight during the day actually helps your circadian rhythm. So your body's meter of knowing when it's time to be awake and time to sleep is actually controlled by that. So make sure you get a good amount of sunlight during the day. The other thing is, obviously engaging in physical activity during the day, making sure it's a few hours, before you sleep. Avoiding caffeine and alcohol a couple of hours before you sleep, as well as food. And then I think, making your bedroom a very cool, quiet, and dark space for you to sleep. People have a tendency to engage in electronics before they sleep. They should try to avoid. We're always on our phones. You can turn on the blue light, which is always helpful. But that's another thing that we should try to avoid. I know TVs are often in the bedroom, and people tend to watch TV. But again, those are all stimulating things. You want your body to try to relax and be calm during that time. So that's another way, you can do that. And then of course, touching base with your doctor about these things. If, sleep hygiene habits are not working for you, maybe, they can go through it with you step by step. I mentioned some techniques, but they can go through more with you. And then of course, medications are always there. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for the suggestions. I hope we have solved your question soon. Yeah, so the next question I had is there is another common problem which we see in South Asians is acidity.
mhm.
Yeah, so we would love for you to talk about that.
Yeah, so acidity or acid reflux is a quite it's more prevalent now. I think with especially with the rising rates of being overweight and being obese, it becomes another risk factor for that. So in medical terms, we call it GERD. So that's the name for it. And in the United States, it's quite prevalent, almost 20%. And in Asia, it really varies. It can be anywhere from 5 to 10%. But in some parts of India, it's actually up to 18% prevalent in the population. So it really depends. And like I said, things are changing with the rising rates of people being overweight. Generally, we diagnose it clinically, meaning that means based on your symptoms. So people can feel many different symptoms. So one is, the actual heartburn, the chest pain that you can feel, often after you eat. Um, some other things you can feel is maybe trouble swallowing or pain with swallowing. Some people also tend to develop a cough, like a chronic cough. They may not know where it's coming from. And that's why I say every little thing is, sometimes the littlest things that we can't quite piece together, if they're consistently bothering you, it's important to tell your doctor. The other thing is you can have sometimes people will bring up food. They'll regurgitate small amounts of undigested food. And that's why we call it acidity, right? Because your stomach acid is coming up and you can
Yeah.
actually feel the burn. Some other people might have something that is called like hypersalivation. because your stomach acid, your body's natural reaction is to try to neutralize the acid. So it might be producing a lot more saliva. So
Mm-hmm.
some people actually have more saliva in these cases. And then I think, let's see, any other common things? I guess some people have, wheezing that can also happen, or infrequent nausea. So these are some of the common symptoms that, can happen with GERD. There are some what we call, danger symptoms, where, people might be losing a lot of weight, because either it's too painful to swallow or things like that. Some people might have some bleeding, or become anemic. So that's why, a full thorough checkup is usually necessary. But if you're experiencing any of those symptoms, it's always a good idea to let your physician know, especially if it's consistent. Besides clinical symptoms, we can also diagnose GERD when it comes to endoscopy. So like an EGD is what we call it. So it can also be diagnosed on that. And then there's a couple of tricks and tips that you should keep in mind to kind of avoid, feeling the acidity. So, obviously once you eat, don't lay down, right? Stay upright for about 2 to 3 hours. And, if you generally get it at night, then make sure your head is elevated, for some time. The other thing is to avoid trigger foods, right? So caffeine, for example, or chocolate, acidic foods, fried foods, fatty foods. It can be different for everyone what their exact trigger is, but those are some of the most, common things. Some other things can also trigger it, right? Like carbonated beverages or peppermint. Um, and then I guess those are foods, but some things we don't think about are, for example, if you wear, very fitted clothes, that can also contribute to having more acid. So avoid very tightly fitted clothes. And then, like I was saying, some people actually salivate more with the acid. You can actually chew gum to help, create the saliva, which will neutralize the acid.
Okay.
And then some people also have acid reflux because the junction between the stomach and the food pipe is kind of loose and lax, and that's why the acid kind of comes up. So you can actually do, some abdominal breathing exercises to kind of tighten that junction, but there's obviously, surgical interventions that can be done to fix that as well. So those are some tips and tricks.
Okay. So as you mentioned, right, in South Asians we use a lot of lentils and legumes, and it's more on a little on a spicy side, I would
Yeah.
say, right, to make it more tasty, right? And
Mhm.
many times we eat that in the evening, and which can cause acid reflux. So do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, so definitely eat a few hours before you sleep. And also, like I said, make sure you're sitting upright at that time. Of course, you can also tone that down a little bit and avoid, like I said, you have to notice what is your trigger. If it truly is spicy food, then you want to, have that under control and mitigate that. Not saying completely stop it, but maybe you want to back off of it a little bit, and then obviously you can also go to your doctor for medications. But, increasing your water intake, losing weight also helps, right? 10 to 15%. If you lose 10 to 15% of your body weight, that will also help with your GERD. So again, weight, diet, we all see all of it kind of in an interplay, right, with most of these conditions. So, losing the weight, keeping hydrated, eating a few hours before you sleep, those are all things that'll help.
Okay, so uh, how I would say, is there any common solutions for how we can manage our regular health? What are the basic steps we should take just to
Okay.
manage our basic health?
Yeah, so definitely remember the 5 modifiable lifestyle factors, right? So avoiding alcohol, avoiding smoking, making sure you have a healthy, balanced diet, having good sleep, having physical activity, making sure you stay hydrated, and then of course, following up on your chronic medical conditions, which I think is very important. A lot of them you need regular checkups. So for example, if you're diabetic, if you have heart disease, or if you have high blood pressure, these are things that should all be monitored. To make sure you go to your doctor regularly to be monitored, and then they can tell you how long till your follow-up. The other thing is to get, preventative screening for cancers, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's important. So speak to your doctor about that. And then also let your doctor know if you have any concerns, right? So for example, in South Asians, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, they're very common. We have a very heavy family history of it, right?
Yeah.
So let your doctor know. Say, I'm concerned because my father has heart disease, or my grandmother passed away at less than 55. So let them know about these things that may be worrying you, so then they can be appropriately monitored. Because the thing is, the lifespan for humans has increased, right?
Yeah.
But then also means we can find more diseases during that time. So it's
Yeah.
better you find them early, and then we manage them appropriately, or we engage in preventative care, so you
Mhm.
prevent them from happening.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you so much for all the suggestions and tips. I'm sure our viewers and even we learned a lot about even routine, right? Once you get the disease, that is a whole different case. But doing a preventive care and maintaining a healthy lifestyle is really important too.
Yes, no, for sure. I'm so glad, that hopefully you and the viewers have learned some stuff about healthy habits, and it was a pleasure being here. I'm more than happy to answer any questions, once you upload the live. If people want to ask questions under there in the comments, I'll do my best to keep up. But just remember, your lifestyle is very important. It's key to your health. And having a good relationship with your doctor, and a very transparent one, and letting them know, what your concerns are, the changes that you've made, good or bad, in your life, so they can help manage and keep you healthy. So that's the goal. But
Yeah.
I hope, people are a little bit more inspired to be healthy.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you so much. And if we will receive any question, we will definitely tag you or forward you to get the answers.
Sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Urvi. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Bye bye.